Due to the graphic nature of this show, listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Let's Talk About Killers, exclusive content and armchair analysis of the most dangerous people in America.
I'm Lance.
And I'm Dwayne.
And this is the first episode of Let's Talk About Killers. I've been a cult and true crime enthusiast for decades, and Dwayne has been communicating with killers for decades. So we're talking about thousands of letters from around 200 serial killers and about 50 or so, just not serial killers, but killers.
Correct.
And lots of time on the phone with a lot of these guys.
Yes.
And a lot of art, right?
Absolutely. Phone-wise, I would say I keep in touch with, I would say ongoing, probably about 15 individuals. And then as far as artwork, I would say I've got artwork from, probably around, I would say, give or take about 20 to 25, maybe 30.
Wow.
Now, that's more kind of intensive artwork. Some of them maybe have just sent like a piece of something or two versus others that I've gained like maybe 50, 60, 70 pieces. And as far as, for instance, talking about benefiting from anything, I have never sold any of any kind of piece of mail that I've got. I've never sold any kind of artwork for any type of what I would be the term today, memorabilia. I keep it all to myself. That's why I don't advertise this to say, hey, I'm going to sell this piece of artwork. So it's nothing to do with that. Anything they send me, like somebody told me my letters and my artwork are like my children. It's almost like I guard them at all price. But it's when I go to my mailbox, I find that I've got, because I can always tell when it's something like an art piece. I mean, I'm just so giddy to get back home to open that envelope up to find out, what treasure lies inside.
How did you get into corresponding with killers?
It all started back by me stumbling across the website, prisonpenpals.com. I started reading some of the profiles on there, and there were multiple people that had interesting bios talking about their crime, talking about what they were seeking with wanting pen pals. So there was a handful of people that I wrote, and they wrote back, and pretty much we struck out on incredibly interesting correspondences. So then what happened is one day I was going through my correspondence, and there was some articles that I had read in local newspapers of different infamous cases that had taken place. So I thought, what if I wrote them? So my experience with the people that I had written through prisonpenpals.com matriculated to writing more individuals that were into there were more infamous cases. So from there, that's just where it took off. So from that one website of Prison Pen Pals is where I cut my teeth on it, and then it all, like I say, took off from there.
When you're going to contact a killer, what do you say in your first communication?
Pretty much in the initial letter, let them know that I am writing them not to take their correspondence and sell it on the internet, not try to get into asking questions that they have probably been bombarded on asking like 100 times before. What I focus on is the individual themselves. What could I do to assist them in making their sentence a little easier? And from there, tend to, ask if there's any magazines, books, anything, newspapers that they may have an interest in. And from me doing that, it allows them to see that my actions speak louder than my words, in that I am offering pretty much to help them pass their time. And all I want from them is just their time. And just to maybe, I guess, pick their brain a little bit. And that's in my initial letter. I make sure that it's known that, just give me a chance to let my actions speak louder than my words. And then I'm not going to do anything. In other words, I'm going to stand out from anybody else that tries to manipulate maybe a correspondence into getting all of this information, that I'm not that way.
Do you see any reason why corresponding with killers is incompatible with being compassionate to their victims?
That's why I try to, whenever I correspond with them, I attempt not to dig a whole lot into the crime that was committed to where that has, to where it's repeated over and over. So I establish pretty much, what are your interests? What is your daily routine like? So get them into that, but I am careful not to dwell on, because what do mainly people correspond with? They kind of want to escape their daily routine. So I try not to harp on too much of their routine as far as being in prison. I like to maybe think of, more positive things. So that's generally what my correspondence tends to center around.
From what I've seen, it does seem like you have a different rapport with these people than just strictly talking to the killer about nothing but the crimes. I mean, it just seems like you have a different relationship with them in that aspect.
Exactly. And that's what I try to do. And I'll tell you, one of the best ways as far as to get anybody that I've corresponded with to talk to me, or for it to seem that way, or it actually, is that way, is time. They realize that via the writing that they've been writing me for 6 months, 7 months, a year, and, I haven't disappeared. I've stayed pretty much, front and center. And they know if they write me back, I try to write back as soon as possible within about a few days with getting the letter. Because oftentimes one of the complaints is they'll write somebody and it may be 4 months before they hear back from the individual, or it'll be hiatus that'll occur, like for maybe what seems like 7 months or something. All of a sudden they won't hear from them, and then they'll pop up in a letter from them. So what I try to do is not make them wait, so long for to hear back from me.
What do you think the percentage is of people that write back?
It all depends on the individual as far as how well known they are, because of course some of the ones that the cases may have not been heard by too many people, usually you'll hear from, or what I've heard from them pretty rapidly, quickly. But some of the ones that get tons and tons of mail, especially, say for instance, the Menendez brothers, with their situation, they are flooded and inundated with letters. So the chances of you hearing back from them, if you just start writing them right off, chances are that you're not going to hear from them, because with the hundreds and hundreds of letters they get on a daily basis. So yeah, by writing somebody that's not as well known, I guess you could say, yeah, your chances are much better of hearing back from them more readily.
But you have heard from the Menendez brothers.
Yes.
That'll be an interesting episode.
Oh yeah. I look forward to delving into that one when we get to it.
So what we've got today is a weird one. This guy, if you haven't heard his story, is pretty wild. And he's not a serial killer, but he's a killer, and he is awful. So Dwayne, I'm going to just lay out the basic bizarre story of Joe Son, and then we're going to get into the correspondence you've had.
Okay. Sounds good.
There isn't a ton of material out there about Joe Son. There have been some like 10, 15-minute segments. A lot of those have been cut up and mixed together on YouTube. There's just not a lot of real data. His Wikipedia page is good, but if you put it all together, the story goes like this. He was born in Korea, moved to California, went to high school. It looks like he graduated in 1988. From 2002 to 2008, he embarked on his professional fighting career. And there were events where he was like a ringman or he sang and danced and later, fights. It was very strange. But UFC 4 is where he dragged a big cross into the ring as some kind of wrestler for Christ thing and lost after being punched in the groin 20 times. He was in K1 kickboxing bout where he was knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
He was in a pride match where he wore a thong and pink makeup and gave up fast. He was in Extreme Pancreation 2 and lost big time. Came back to Pride and lost again. He was 0 for 4 or 5, depending on how you total it. So his professional fighting career was a joke. But he did begin acting in low-budget action films, usually as the villain. Those, and I've watched them, include Joshua Tree, Blood Fist 5, Bad Blood, Shoot Fighter 2. I mean, these were terrible. But then fame came calling, and he played Odd Job in Austin Powers. He didn't speak. He had, seconds on screen, but he, and people recognize him.
Right.
So life continued to be weird for this guy. And in 2008, he was living with a roommate and he had an argument with him and decided to take it out on the roommate's car. So after, reports are unclear whether he just, kicked the driver's side door in or broke away. I don't know, and it doesn't really matter, but he was arrested for felony vandalism. He got 60 days in jail and parole for some number of months. And as part of his parole agreement, he had to give a DNA sample. But he didn't inform the Department of Corrections that he had moved, so they arrested him again. They gave him an additional 90 days in jail, and at that point in time, they took his DNA.
Right.
So after they arrested him for the second time, they took his DNA. 2 months later, they matched his DNA to an awful sexual assault case from Christmas Eve, 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into it, but it is bad. In 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison. Less than a month after he was remanded to prison, he killed his cellmate. He was convicted of that and received an additional 27 years in 2017. And your correspondence began in 2016 before he was convicted for murdering his cellmate. But right. and we'll come back to that.
Okay.
There were 2 DNA samples taken from the original crime scene, and his was one. And they found his accomplice fairly quickly by just going through pictures of him with people. This guy kept popping up. They hung out and, got his trash and took DNA off a cup. And lo and behold, it was him. That guy's name is Santiago Gaitan. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes, I think that is correct.
And Santiago was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months. The assault was insane. These 2 guys asked for directions, tricked this girl with her dog who was walking home, drove around, took her someplace, pistol whipped her, sexually assaulted her in every way you can possibly imagine. Then took her out of the car wearing nothing but her own pants tied around her eyes, did a mock execution, told her it was her lucky day and Merry Christmas, and drove away.
The part where they left her, what they did is, like that was mentioned, that they were going to kill her, that they were going to drive to the bluffs, I think is what they called it. It was an area in California. And they said that they were going to throw her body like over the bluffs. What they did is she was under every reason thinking that she was going to die at that moment. Well, they get to the destination where they were and they open the door and then they tell her as she thinks she's going to be thrown out right then, they tell her to run. I can imagine the terror that she was going through from all that she had dealt with prior to this at this moment. And then to be told to, just pick up and just run. I mean, pure adrenaline was all that she could have been, have been functioning on. I just can't imagine, all that she went through.
The injuries she sustained were crazy. Like all of her teeth were loose. Her jaw was disconnected. Like it was just, I mean, it was everything about it was just vicious. And then as time passed, she recovered from that. She got married, had 4 kids, beat cancer, and is just, this really badass woman. And that is not how it's going for these guys. One other thing before we get into the correspondence, when you look at not just this, but cases where they get these strange sentences, like 270 years to life.
Right.
Or, his accomplice got 17 years, was eligible for parole 6 years ago. And there are all these different, it doesn't make any sense. One thing without going into all of the, how outrageous it is as, they were seating a jury and then even the prosecution finds out that most of the stuff they've done, the statute of limitations had run out. Like sexual assault, kidnapping, these things, if you can wait it out, you get away with it. Now they were able to use torture and a couple of other things. This whole complicated way they jumped in and out of, what they could and couldn't charge these guys with to get them on something. And his accomplice admitted it. But I don't understand, number one, why we feel like it's okay to lie. I understand timely trial. I understand there has to be a statute of limitations, so that at some point things get dealt with. But man, some of these brutal things, if DNA proves it, like I just feel like that's a lot to let go.
It is. And one part that I think is that partly it's situated that way is, say, for instance, if someone is going to commit a crime and they know exactly how long the statute of limitation is, they'll weigh the option of, well, I think if I committed this crime, I think I could live with that statute being that way. But it's almost like they just never know when it's going to play out or how long, or it's all left up as a kind of a gamble. So you never know, like say a crime's committed, you think, oh, well, I'm going to get 3 years for this or 4 years. Well, if I want to kill somebody, I think, okay, well, I can serve that much time behind bars, but you never know. You could be given life. You could be given the death penalty. It's given if you happen to be in a state where, the death penalty is, looked at. But otherwise, you just never know the gamble. It's like it's a roll of the dice. And I think it's set up that way so you're not able to predict what your sentence most likely will be, because it could run the gamut.
No, I get that. And then upon sentencing, these people get, 270 years in prison to life, or life in prison, or, 10 life sentences. Like, it just seems weird. Why don't we just say you're never able to get out? It's life in prison.
Exactly. And then if say, for instance, if there was one sentence and it was like state sentence and then federal sentence, then they'll say, well, they'll run concurrently. And, it's almost like, well, they could run concurrently, or they may or may not. It's just like, it's all these various directions and myriad of ways that whenever a crime is committed, on the direction it could take.
And don't get me wrong, I'm all for the justice system should be fair and crime and punishment should work. And it's way too much to go into on the first episode. But, I used to be a hardcore death penalty supporter. And then I saw how many people due to DNA were beginning to, they found that they're not guilty.
Yes. In fact, speaking of the death penalty, there was an individual that I corresponded with several years ago. He actually wanted to become a proponent that when someone is going through the death penalty, that their organs could be harvested beforehand. However, the situation that they would harvest those organs, and it was just a big situation. But he went through, I'm talking about years of attempting to, have his body be like he would have the option if he wanted his body, his organs to be harvested. So that was an interesting situation. I heard a lot about what he went through and what he was going through, with the trying to get that accomplished.
Every time you think, and when we get into the correspondence, that's what's fascinating to me, is you can talk about these cases and you can say, here are the facts according to people on television or the internet. But when you've actually spoken to these people and you get a very different perspective, like we have all this correspondence from BTK.
Yeah.
There have been a million documentaries about him, scripted films about him. His daughter recently made a documentary about him. There's just so much of it. And we will definitely get into some BTK episodes down the line because you take a different approach, like we were talking about, to talking to these people. The material is different. It isn't like calling and saying, okay, I need to know exactly the grisly details of whatever.
Exactly.
So that leads me to Joe Son. A year before he was convicted of killing his cellmate after being in prison for 1 month. His cellmate was a vagrant person that was serving 2 years for like sex offender registry thing or something, just for interest. That's what he was in there for before Joe Son killed him. So you start talking to him in 2016. I have seen some of these letters, but what is your, it sounds like I'm just interviewing you all the time, but I'm just so fascinated by this. What was your, before I tell you what I think about what I saw, what was your take when you would talk to this guy?
My take was, I knew somebody that was, from reading it, started off as, the first letter is just anyone talking. And then as the correspondence grew, it took the tone of an individual that I could tell that was haunted mentally in every way that you could think about it by a bunch of just his way of thinking was just excessively, you could tell he was having a very, very hard time, with what he wanted. As far as with the correspondence, he would, for instance, he remained hyper focused on a bunch of things. Like, as far as, like, he would make a request and say, for instance, if I wasn't able to meet the request immediately, I could tell within the letter, I would get a letter, like a week later, and it just was kind of admonishing me, why I didn't do that, how I didn't care as much, or what I said I was going to do in the beginning of the correspondence, like I didn't follow through. And it was just, I could just tell he was having just an incredibly hard time emotionally, mentally, in every which way.
I hear you on all of that. I mean, I looked at the letters and the art is strange, but compelling. And the handwriting is not, I don't know if handwriting analysis is like bite marks or lie detectors. Like, I don't know if it's a real thing, but man, if I were a handwriting analyst, I think that would, it's weird. And it's very difficult to read. He capitalizes every single word. He writes starting on the outside of the page and works to the middle. It's a whole thing. And what I noticed was he's kind of begging for attention, but in a troubling way. He's kind of flirting, but also is like a lot of, I'm nothing if nobody loves me. I'm nothing if you don't care about me, and all this stuff. And it just comes off, and it's different than desperation. It just comes off as just real weird. And I know that I'm not qualified. I don't know how many people are to say this guy's crazy or this guy's, what is the thing? Like psychopaths, there's something physically wrong with their brain, and sociopaths learned it. He does, when the detectives are interviewing him, because they have the DNA, they've got him stone cold busted. And they bring him in, and this is, I've seen this video quite a bit. They bring him in and they say, this woman was abducted and they did all these things to her and they let her loose like this. And it was on Christmas Eve. And he said, that's bad.
Mm.
And I thought, that is not a normal reaction. Like, it wasn't, and they're saying, like, we've got you. And he doesn't really show any emotion one way or the other. It just freaked me out,
Very monotone.
Yeah. So I don't know when I read those letters, and they are tough to read.
Exactly, because after I'd read them, I'd have to read it probably, I remember 4 or 5 times before I could settle on, okay, this is what's being communicated to me. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything, because I made sure that the response that I would give, and when I would write my reply letter, I wanted to make sure that I covered every single detail. And every letter, there was just a lot to cover. And sometimes while reading what he had written, I'd go through and think there were maybe something like in between. Maybe this is what was said, but this is what I really meant. Wanted to make sure that, I guess anything that was written in between the lines, I just didn't want to miss anything, whatsoever. But doing that with, like, say, any of the letters, it was not the easiest of things to be able to respond to, because, like I said, I didn't want to miss a single detail.
I've seen a lot of this correspondence, and it's never, I wouldn't say that, like, this killer's worse than this one. Like, he's not as bad as somebody else, because, what he did to this woman was awful.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're just analyzing the letters and you look at somebody who killed a dozen people versus this guy, and the serial killer just seems like such a normal person compared to this guy. He's out there. Or that's my take. I could be totally wrong.
What really got me is from the jump, the letters I would get, there were just a lot to digest. There was a lot to be said. Like, say, one of the letters, for instance, if he was expecting, say, I think that there was a time he had asked for photos of a particular dog breed, and I wasn't able to send those immediately. So I remember one of the letters, I think he had admonished me for not sending those as quickly as I said that I would. And because at the time, of course, the correspondence, as far as like, that is that's it. It's a hobby that I do. Of course, there's real life that you have to tend with. Bills have to be paid. You go into work, and then honestly, whenever you get a letter that is from what he had written me, it was just a lot of focus had to go into that. It's just not, you pull out a piece of paper with a pen and just start writing, hey, how are you? It's a much deeper letter that I want to supply, especially when someone goes to the trouble to correspond with me. So coming in after a hard day, after a hard day's work, sometimes you have to really put your brain into, okay, how am I going to reply to this letter? What am I going to say? How am I going to make it feel like, oh, I just didn't just breeze through your letter, and this is just, hi, how are you? And, put in the envelope and send to you. So I had to really get into the mental, just the mental way of how I was going to do this. And like I say, certain days, you just have to really, I didn't want to seem like my writing was forced, but, you really have to say, okay, I promised this individual that this is entered a correspondence, and I don't want to, stay away from it or leave it, shelve it, I guess you could say, right away. Wanted to make sure I gave the letters as much attention as I could. So,
well, you're taking this thing on, and I guess that if you're in their situation, a minute feels like a week or whatever. So they're anxious, but they got to respect the fact that you're even doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, he wanted to get a dog. He thinks he might get a dog. Isn't that right?
Yes. At the time. And a lot of it also, I think he wanted the photos to help, like if he had them, he could put them up in his cell and be able to see them, look at them, and help him to focus on better days, live out memories when he had the dogs. But I do remember in several of those letters was he had mentioned about, how this, and I cannot remember offhand exactly which breed of dog that it was, but it kind of strikes me as if I remember right, it was like a pit bull or something similar to, or a bulldog of some sort. But he wanted me to send those photos, and within I think it was about a few weeks walked on, and I had not got around to making those copies to send. And I just remember about a few weeks later, I got a letter that he just was not happy with me because I had not sent those pictures. The thing is, it wasn't the way he talked about it is if I was doing this, to be, I don't know, like you make this promise and you broke it to me, where like you pointed out, no, it's just, I've had a busy day at work. I've come in and I just was not able to, order books or anything that had the dog pictures in them. I think it was just an understanding of, I'm not doing anything in a certain way to cause grief or pain. It's just that, as they say, sometimes life gets in the way of things.
But do you think, I personally know a couple of killers, and one of them is doing life, and he's been in for 19 years for a crime he did when he was very young. And he has, it's amazing what he's done and the degrees he's gotten and the outreach he's doing. Does this, and that does not excuse his crimes, but does he, and I want to say that I don't, when somebody says they're doing life and they've, become a yoga teacher or whatever, that makes them heroic. But I think you need to either find some way to productively pass your time, or you're going to go nuts no matter who you are, or you can actually use this time to do something meaningful, Do you see him engaging in any of that at any point in time? We're speculating is what we do. What do you think he's going to do?
My thoughts, what I would think is when we were corresponding, I think there was this huge issue that was dealing with his mental aspect that I don't think he realized that it was as bad as it was. So as long as in time, if he would have taken the time to focus on that and realize there is something major going on that I need to focus on, instead of, just being upset because I didn't, get photos of, dogs that I requested. So to answer the question, I think if he pretty much could focus on the situation at hand about what was going on, with the mental issue, I think that he could hopefully think of some way that he could benefit. But until he quelled that inner voice that was going on in his head that he, carried through on paper, I think if he understood what was going on with that, then everything would be fine. So like I said, I'm not sure exactly what form, because I'm not sure what mental health hygiene or any type of thing that was offered at the facility that he was at. But I just know that if he were able to harness what was going on, like the inner demons that were, pursuing, I think that he could possibly help himself. But until then, I'm just not sure.
Do you think he feels remorse? Do you think he even understands?
I think that he does, but he doesn't maybe know how to express it.
I feel guilty if I start to feel bad for him. This guy committed this horrible crime, this gang rape, and just, such violence. And then went on to play a very violent guy in terrible action movies. And then had we'll call it a short career as a fighter And then it all came crashing down. But there's just something, I feel like he had some kind of complex on top of it. I think he saw himself as this badass, despite what reality kept presenting. There's something weird there. But I feel bad if I start to put myself in his place and think, okay, I've had this mental illness and I'm locked in this cage and all of this stuff, because I feel way worse for the victim. And my guess is that she would say, hey, don't feel sorry for me. I'm a total badass. But the fact is, it's hard for me to sympathize with these guys. I mean, how do you feel about it?
That's 1,000%, understandable. And I think another thing where I'm hoping that my correspondence made, instead of just, writing a letter to individual, I'm hoping maybe that somehow the correspondence that I get from these individuals, that down the road, they could be looked at, analyzed, and maybe somebody doing research can determine something within the letter, maybe the letter, the art, or something that can help them, maybe make a better profile of an individual, or somehow that it would help any kind of a forensic investigation, down the line.
I think that would be the greatest thing that could happen.
There are cases where I have written individuals that my intention of writing them was hoping that they would, mention a case that wasn't solved or an individual that had been killed. It would be more becoming to telling someone the information if they felt like a friendly, rapport with them, versus if a detective just comes in there and, they say, we want this information.
See, that's the thing. I have seen a couple other people that have done a lot of correspondence, and they claim that they went in, in effort to trick them into confessing to things, and that they had gotten some. And I thought it was very suspect. I hate when, and many serial killers have done it. They confess to crimes they had nothing to do with, and it just muddies the water.
Absolutely. And, a lot of them may think, I don't remember where this victim was, or where, it starts to kind of overlap. But some of it also is like, I think a lot of them, they get in there and they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to start remembering how many cases there were. And I think in their head, they kind of get lost. Not all, but, some of them.
This is not like a hobby in the past. The letters continue to roll in. The phone calls continue to happen every day. And if a killer were to reveal anything about a past crime, anything that, the police are not aware of, the first thing we would do is take it to them. We wouldn't just go, okay, great, for our podcast. I mean, if somebody tells us something that could help an investigation, obviously we're going to do that. All right, everybody, that's the show. As always, thank you for listening. Get in touch with us at letstalkaboutkillers.com. Follow us on Instagram at Let's Talk About Killers. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.